Hello, and hope everyone's having a good Saturday. I'm David Gray Hammond. I'm a white male of Mediterranean descent with a shaved head, glasses, and a lip piercing. And in a second, I'll pass it over to the other two people on the screen with me. To my left is Bobbi Elman, and underneath us is a pigeon, by the looks of it. Pretty sure that's Northern Autie or Psy, the famous Psy. So, Bobbi, do you want to give us a brief physical description?
Sure. I'm a very white female presenting person with kind of reddy purple hair, wearing black glasses and a gray top.
Excellent. And Northern Autie, do you want to give us a brief description of yourself?
I'm a pigeon. Seems to be on the road. I think it might be London Bridge, or is it the other one? In front of Queen Elizabeth Tower.
I have to be honest with how thrown I am right now, because before we started the intro, Psy was there, and now he's a pigeon.
I mean, technically, I'm a rock dove, but
okay,
know them as pigeons.
Okay. So yeah, today we're here to talk about exposure anxiety in autistic people. Bobbi, do you want to say anything before we launch into? I think you've got a presentation for us, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint because I love a PowerPoint of what exposure anxiety is. But the only thing I can say right now is that the more I'm researching into it, the more I know about it, I think it's connected to demand avoidance, and I think it's a definite type of demand avoidance.
Okay. Everyone happy for us to just hand over to Bobbi?
Right,
let's do this. I'm going to turn my camera and mic off so I don't interrupt.
So today, I want to talk about exposure anxiety, and my name is Bobbi Elman. So I like to give everybody an idea of what I'm going to talk about before I talk about it. So the agenda, what I'm going to go into is Donna Williams. She's the autistic author, artist, musician, poet that kind of coined the term exposure anxiety. And then I'm going to look at demand avoidance. I'm going to look at what is not exposure anxiety, what is exposure anxiety. And I left off a bit here, sorry. I'm going to go into tips afterwards of things that possibly can be done if you're dealing with an autistic child that also deals with exposure anxiety. So exposure anxiety was coined by Donna Williams, and that's Donna Williams. And she says, I was born in 1963 in the inner city of Urban, Australia. Though I was formerly named Donna by my mother, I was instead referred to by all close who know me as Polly. And that's how I knew her as well. I did not know her as Donna Williams. I knew her as Polly Samuel. So she reverted to that name in 2015. Polly also had a type of Ehlers-Danlos, which I think is really important for people to understand. She had vascular Ehlers-Danlos, which is the kind of the worst or the most difficult one to manage. Anyway, she also, in fact, unfortunately passed away from breast cancer, which metastasized and became terminal. And she also suffered intense abuse as a child. Sorry, I should have given a trigger warning, and I didn't, for talk of death and also abuse. She developed dissociative identity disorder as a result of that, and previously had what they called multiple personality disorders, what they called it. And that's kind of how we connected, because she ended up telling me one time in a chat that one of her personas would have very much liked me because they were punk and goth. Anyway, so in 1965, at 2 years old, she was diagnosed as schizophrenic, pretty much, and labeled as disturbed. Okay, she's written very many books. She's written Nobody Nowhere, which I highly recommend, and Somebody Somewhere, which I also highly recommend. Live Color to the Blind, also highly, highly recommend. And I, once again, will make these slides available to everybody afterwards, like I did on the previous one, so you can go a little bit deeper into her. The last thing before I go further, the last thing I want to say about Donna Williams is you need to understand that she was of an era, and she had beliefs that we constantly argued about in terms of what autism was and what can be done to support or help. And she believed in some sort of biological connection, which I don't. And as we know, you can't cure it. So I needed to put that out there to understand that where she's talking about exposure anxiety and where she's talking about her life, she's superb and it's brilliant information. But when you dive into the other stuff, you might find things that are quite conflicting. Anyway, so forgive me while I take a drink. So exposure anxiety is not really well known. It's definitely not understood. And I believe, as I said before, there's a crossover with pathological demand avoidance. And Donna thought it also was ODD as well. And it's very much under research. It could be considered another category of demand avoidance profile. But without a lot of research, we won't know for sure. There's only 2 people that talk about it, me and another gentleman named Paul Isaacs. And Paul presents and trains on autism as well as exposure anxiety. So as far as I'm concerned, and as far as Donna was concerned, there seems to be a crossover of EA, exposure anxiety, and PDA, pathological demand avoidance. And I don't like the pathological part, so I call it demand avoidance. And I would suggest that exposure anxiety is a type of demand avoidance, and the attention, even in the interception, is seen as a demand. And that's really vital to understand when you're talking about somebody who's dealing with exposure anxiety. So what is exposure, what is not exposure anxiety, I think is also really, really important to know. So it's not that feeling that some people get where they think somebody's staring at them. It's like tingle or something to the effect. I don't necessarily get it, but I know other people who do. It's not that. And it's not the, I can never say this word, scopophobia. Sorry. The fear of being stared at is basically what that is. And it's not a spotlight effect, which relies too heavily on the perception than what is reality. And it's more than social anxiety disorder, and it's a heck of a lot more deeper than anything to do with shyness. So, what is exposure anxiety? So, I'm going to leave you to read that, and again, I will put that out there in a slide, or the slides out there for people to access. Only reason is it's extremely small on my screen, so I'm going to find difficulty reading all of that. But basically what she's saying is the world expected her to respond. It gave the message that it had evaded. I was left with aversion, diversion, retaliation responses. I stopped existing. And that's really important to understand, this idea of, and I'll go into it in the next point, the idea of this excruciating sense of audience to one's own existence. And it definitely does result in a compulsive. It is not, there's no control on this, of involuntary retaliation, diversion, and avoidance, aversion, every time. The triggers are not demands as such, or perceived as demands, but the attention and the perceived attention. And that, therefore, is a demand. It's a disconnect of self. Exposure anxiety is the invisible cage that challenges the person to either side with it and therefore identify self with their own compulsive self-protective responses. So you imagine that it's something in you that you don't want any attention on yourself. You can't deal with the attention, and you almost have to side with it to survive. So living with EA, what does that look like? Well, I can tell you because my youngest definitely 1000% went through this and still goes through this, which is what brought me to Donna and why we became very close friends. Because from day one, I was dealing with a child that resisted potty training of all kinds and holding it until they were not seen. They would hide under the tables. They couldn't directly be taught by anything. I had to do everything as if it was for myself or pretending not to know something. Yeah. So narrating it all along, but this feigned ignorance. And then praise also never works and results in that retaliation. And it's also often explosive, that diversion, that avoidance. And it affects every single part of the person. So you can imagine eating is seen as a demand. drinking, doing anything for self would be seen also as a demand. So living with EA, I'm sure I've got yeah, I do. Okay. So you have to understand, for a young child in a classroom or in an education setting, they will never, ever answer if they're called on, because that's attention. There is mutism or if directly questioned in front of other people, like they will shut down. I mean, my youngest would literally shut down if you put attention on them, ask them something in the middle of a class, they wouldn't be able to speak. And it appears indifferent, not caring, non-committal, because that's easier than showing any interest or emotion. So they will say, I don't care. Doesn't bother me, because it's easier than actually accepting that as a demand. So behavioral tools of any kind, as we know in the compliance tools, are never going to work. What is sticker chart and what is star of the week? It's attention. Automatically, there's going to be a retaliation of some sort to that. And they know if the strategies are being used. It's like they can feel it. I think a lot of kids with demand avoidance also are the same. They know when somebody's trying to strategize them. So they feel as if others can see your thoughts. My child literally felt as if their entire brain was written all over their body, and that people could read every thought and emotion that they actually had. So they feel if others can see your thoughts, and they also avoid being in photos, because what is a photo? Automatically an attention situation. So again, with living with EA, as I think with most situations with autistic children, learning is best when it's self-motivated and self-directed. Social interaction must be on their terms, and trust is imperative as not to trigger EA. Being authentic, honest, and non-patronizing, because they will know, they hear the tone, they know what's going on, and they can feel it, and they know a demand's coming, so automatically it's that uncontrollable retaliation of some sort. And indirect confrontational approaches work. Now, what do I mean by an indirect confrontational approach? Direct confrontational approaches involving praise and direct praise and attention. That is the direct, automatic, to your face attention. I'm giving you this praise. When you're doing indirect, it achieves lowering exposure anxiety, because it's progressively proving that there's no reason for the involuntary retaliation in any way, shape, or form. There's no personal self to expose. It's not directly interpersonal. It seems purely incidental. And it appears of all fleeting and unlikely to occur. So it's something that just happens, and it's organic, and that is the way into actually teaching autistic children who deal with this exposure anxiety. And it works really well when the focus is on an object of some sort. Obviously, the attention saw the object, not the person. Exposure anxiety does not seem to rise in that situation. Sorry, I'm slightly nervous today, and I really don't know why. So, some tips. Now, these tips I got a lot from Donna, and I will tell when I think things are slightly different, like I've updated them slightly. So, respect for the sanctity of one's own world. So, being self-owning, that means to communicate and participate as though it is for yourself, for your benefit. Enjoy yourself, be silly in your own world, dance as if no one's watching. Like, that's really vitally important, because it takes the attention away. So lose the audience. If you're focused very intently on a person with exposure anxiety, try to be less worried, less concerned, and less desperate for a change. So the person can stop defending themselves against the evasion of that constant pressure and attention. And reduce that feeling as if you're wanting and waiting constantly for something. So wasn't me. Attributing attention, a responsibility to objects works. That's what I was just saying. So the jacket is asking to be put on to protect you from the rain, right? This also can help model a way to initiate something without feeling that exposure anxiety. So the focus is on the option, on the object. So your shoes, those shoes need to go on your feet because they want to go outside and take a walk. Anyway, so the buffer zone. Communicate through objects, as I just said, made up characters and funny voices as if for yourself. that worked really well with mine. Now, I'm not going to say that's going to definitely work very well with everybody else. You know, there's a lot of other kids out there that actually wouldn't work. So it demonstrates indirect confrontational ways that may make it more comfortable to communicate. So objects, I can't push this enough. Objects and using objects to educate and to help initiate is key. So yes equals no, 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 yes. No equals yes, yes equals no. So eating, if it's extreme, try leaving little plates of food around for no one. So I did this as well. You know, my kid was playing constantly and not necessarily eating. And I knew eating was a demand at that point. So there was different plates that would just happen to be set around the room there if anybody wanted to have them. Okay, and it actually may tempt them to actually eat, you know, because you're not giving it directly to them. You're not saying, here's food, I want you to eat. You're not giving it to man. You're leaving it there for them to decide to eat whenever they choose to. So good cop and bad cop. Not really a fan of this necessarily, but that definitely can work for some kids. So if the toilet's an issue and the child's actually holding, do not draw any attention to that and literally ignoring it. And if nappies, make a big deal about when they actually need to be changed, because the idea is you're trying to trigger the exposure anxiety, you know, to help with toileting. I absolutely disagree with that. And I think there's a lot better ways of figuring out that with an exposure anxiety child. If that child is feeling like they need to hold and do it in their own time, then you need to give them that space, and you need to give them that, create that area where they can do that in their own time and not seeing that as a demand. And the problem is it's an internal demand. So they have to get over that themselves to be able to be comfortable. So if you're creating an environment that's comfortable for them to do that, that exposure anxiety shouldn't rise up so much. So they also say this, when you want, and I also don't recommend this, it's the reversal. When you teach something or promote something, ignoring it in an obvious way, act as if you cannot notice it. So again, Donna's trying to say, use the exposure anxiety against the child in a way, which I don't totally agree with, but I wanted you to know what other tips and things are out there, the good and the bad. And like I said, more research is needed on this, and I'm hoping somebody will help me figure out ways to create better suggestions of helping children with exposure anxiety than what we currently have. So again, a disappear. If it's hard to engage in something, singing, counting, tapping, or using rhythm in a non-invasive way for yourself may distract and relieve the pressure. Absolutely worked with my child. When my child had to be in any sort of assembly of some sort, and especially around Christmas time, sitting and just tapping on the legs made it much easier. And they didn't feel like they had to, the demand wasn't actually there to join in. And plus, that depends on also the teachers and the children that support your children. The people that support your children have to be willing to think differently. And getting it wrong, I did that all the time. That I do think it works. I constantly got things wrong. I constantly couldn't figure out how to do things. So, giving my child the opportunity to take over and show me, and it was a way to really go over, especially if you had to go over something. So tying shoelaces, it's practice type situation. If I kept forgetting how to do it and kept getting it wrong, that may also help my child have the space to practice without a demand. And yes, but so when dealing with explosive or violent retaliation, try as hard as possible to react with no, without a no or a don't. Like it's literally the worst thing you can say to a child is no or don't. It sounds, and she's saying completely different here. So here's where I'm sort of updating things a little bit. So I would say, instead of saying things like she says, gentle biting, I would say, try to find a different way for the child to express that explosion, that explosive retaliation. And the idea is to understand the child more, to not get constantly those retaliation and avoid the explosive retaliations. That's actually the idea. And codependency can make it worse, defending against trying to help. It can become a way to disappear and never doing anything for self. So you have to be really careful about that. If I'm constantly doing something for myself rather than them eventually taking it on themselves, that's kind of a codependency. And my child could literally disappear into a space of, I don't need to do anything. Just doing things is a demand, and that's hard. So you have to be really, really careful of that. And don't be too quick to jump in. Like I find this with autistic children, you know, the idea of them learning things for themselves and the natural consequences is something quite important, I think, for autistic children. You know, do not jump in and take over automatically. And don't be afraid to forget or become incapable. You know, it's not a pride thing. You know, if you're working with a child who has exposure anxiety, you know, telling them you don't understand something, you're actually helping them learn. Anyway. So references, I always include references, very many different references, and there's not a lot out there about exposure anxiety. So that literally is everything I could find. And my little details. And thank you very much. I probably rambled a heck of a lot and stumbled in some places, but I appreciate you all. And that's the end.
We've all moved position, and we've had Jaesic join us. Jaesic, would you like to give a brief physical description?
Hello, yes. Hi, everyone. I am a white non-binary human with bleach blonde hair on top and shaved sides. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and I have a messy room behind me.
Thank you. Let me start, Bobbi, by saying that was a fantastic presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd really like to talk more about exactly where exposure anxiety fits into the PDA profile. So do you want to elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah,
or?
Absolutely, I can. When you have a demand avoidant child, but the demand avoidance are so intense that even interception, like even the demand of eating or the demand of going to the toilet, that to me, how can it not be related to demand avoidance? How can they? I mean, it's to me, it's literally just another presentation of it. Like it's just a little offshoot, but it's still the same thing. It's still driven by demand, but the only difference is the demand. The demand for a person who deals with exposure anxiety is, like I said, that excruciating sense of audience to one's own existence. Like that is constant all the time. You feel like your whole being is an audience to everything and everybody around you. So I think possibly it's even a more extreme demand avoidance.
Yeah, and I think something that people need to be aware of is that it's not just something that happens to children either.
Yes.
I know for me as an adult, especially based on what you've said in that presentation, exposure anxiety is something that I experience, and I experience it a lot, and I've had various mental health professionals tell me, oh, it's obsessive compulsive disorder, it's this, it's that. But actually, I think had they known a bit more about being autistic and PDA and the things that can happen when we are autistic and PDA, and they might have said, well, actually, David, the reason you're worried that people can see the thoughts in your head is because you have really extreme exposure anxiety.
Exactly, because that's my child, exactly my child, and what's definitely 21 now, so still happening. Lesser to a degree, they seem to have a handle on it a bit, but they still sometimes say to me things like, well, I thought you knew something. I'm like, how would I know? Well, I thought it, but you haven't said it to me. You know what I mean? So there's still this part of them that thinks everybody still can read what's going on in their head. Like it's still there.
Yeah, and I think it can take on increasingly extreme forms. Trigger warning, I'm going to mention my experience of psychosis now. One of the delusions that I experienced in my last psychotic episode was that people could hear my thoughts as if they were being broadcast out loud. And it became a really extreme manifestation of that exposure anxiety. And, you know, I often wonder if I'd have had the correct support as an autistic person around exposure anxiety, would I have required time as an inpatient? Would I have required shed loads of medication? You know, because that is, you know, what the reality for autistic adults often is, that, you know, we spend time as inpatients, we take lots of medication because psychiatrists or, you know, whoever tells you need to. But actually, there are strategies to work around exposure anxiety. And I'm aware that I've been talking for a minute. So is there anyone else who wants to talk?
No, that I'm soaking all of this up. So, but I do have a few questions. I keep looking at the slides that you sent me, and I don't know why my numbers aren't lining up. So sorry, I don't have the like direct reference, but there is something about so the psychosis you bringing up, David, and then also DID from I forget her name. Yes, Donna.
Yes.
And it's curious because I'm actually right now going through my own exploration of dissociative identity issues. I don't think I have DID because that's like several like personas or alters, people call them. Like, I don't think I have that exactly, but I do have modes that I get in, and I do dissociate quite a lot. It's not that good. So, but all of this being said, I also have and I'm working on it, but a sense of self, right? A consistent sense of self is something that I lack. And I have been misdiagnosed in 2019 with BPD, borderline. And I was curious if that is something that could also be used more exploration as like the overlap between, because you brought up ODD, or I forget, there was another one, but there's like a bunch of overlappings, right?
Yeah, go on.
Oh no, I like, that's my posturing. I just like, or conjecture. Like, I'm wondering if there's more to explore there, because it sounds like all of these things are related in me, where I am an adult who has been forced, as a female bodied person, been forced to mask in specific ways growing up, to the point where a lot of those things became my personality. And I like unpacking that. It's hard to find my sense of self. I am very, how do you say it? I'm very affected by the energies that I'm around. So when I'm with one group of people, I become one person. And when I'm in another group, I become another person. And when I'm by myself, I kind of freak out. I've had some psychotic things. Like, there's just so much that feels connected, and I haven't figured it out, but this feels like this could be part of the puzzle, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're describing sounds very much like exposure anxiety. Dissociation is what I was talking about. When you get to the point where you don't care, it doesn't bother me, like whatever, that's easier. So but you're also, yeah, it is, right? Like totally easier. But also when you're feeling like, because I think you are also hyper empathetic, which is also like my youngest. So my youngest deals with hyper empathy as well as exposure anxiety. You can imagine how they match. Right.
Wow.
Right. So you're feeling, when you go into a room, you're feeling everything. But that exposure anxiety is also terrifying you, because you're feeling everything. You're assuming everybody else is feeling you too. So it shoots through the roof. So to this day, mine doesn't go anywhere without somebody with them, because they can. Yeah. They literally can. Yep. So I totally get what you're talking about. And I see the overlap, and I see how people, you know, psychologists and things could classify this as different things. And that's why I'm so like kind of passionate about it, because I lived with it. And I know other children that I worked with that were dealing with it. I know adults that are dealing with it, but nobody talks about it. And if it's a type of demand avoidance, can you imagine how much trauma it also would save people to understand that, you know, yeah, you have a demand avoidance, but that demand avoidance is this high and it's so big. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question, because, or statement, whatever, something to talk about. Because I was thinking in adults, you know, going through my like masking history and all that. When you enter the room, like you said, and you're soaking in all the energies, and then you have to figure out how to not be demand avoidant to the, like, I have put myself in situations and impulsively or even compulsively done actions that are not of character to me, like to the most consistent self or sense of self that I have, which gets me into certain situations where people take advantage of me, or they ostracize me, or this, that, and the other thing. And I notice that there is very specific moments where my own perception of the demand makes me mute.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And that's what we're talking about with Donna. When I was little, you know, everything, breathing was almost a demand avoidance to Donna. Like, Donna hurt herself without even meaning to, didn't know she was, because of the feelings, the interception that was going on that she felt that were all demands. You know, she in her book, she talks about not peeing in a toilet, but going and peeing in a corner of her room. Because it wasn't demand avoidant to do it there.
Right.
Like, even the toilet was a demand to her.
Wow.
I mean, that's why I say, if anybody gets a chance to read Nobody Nowhere, honestly, the most amazing book and the most amazing situation she's been through. And to come out of disassociation and becoming multiple alters, and then bringing that all together. But she did the work to do that. Like, and it took a lot of work for her to do that, to bring it all together. And that's why she started writing about exposure anxiety. And that's why there's a book by Donna about exposure anxiety called The Invisible Page. You know, because that was also important to her for people to understand, because she could see how it could be misconstrued as, you know, some other mental health situation going on. You know?
Yeah. Wow. No, this is very, very eye-opening for me. I did not realize what went into, because I've been exploring PDA specifically for me, but I didn't realize that there could be more to it. And then you brought this to our group, and I'm just like, oh my God, there's so much to explore here. Wow.
Yeah.
I have to laugh too, and we'll read some comments. There is a slide in one, I think it's towards the end, where you're like talking about the do's and don'ts for specific things, and not making a big deal about things. Like, if my mom had just passively said, oh, we're going to grandma's house, instead of like making it this like event, you know, or like any family gathering at all, I think I would have been much more interested in engaging and not feel so anxious and like violent, honestly. Like, I had explosive episodes like you're talking about. Like, I just, this is blowing my mind. So, David, do you want to, oh, sorry.
I'm glad you mentioned that about the explosive episodes, because I do want to point that out as well, because I did those slides years ago, and I pulled her stuff out because I know it's out there and I know people will read it. But this whole idea of using exposure anxiety against somebody to have them, you know, to me, that's all compliance based. And like I said before, there were times when Donna and I completely disagreed with each other on certain things, and especially when it comes to compliance. And when you know better, you do better type thing. So yeah, not making a big deal. But I also would say that if you have a child or you have friends that have exposure anxiety, don't use it against them. Don't try to twist it around on them, because all you're doing is messing up the trust. That's how I see it now.
Yeah.
You know, you're messing up trust big time with somebody if you try to use it against them, because it's a battle for them alone as it is. You've just so eloquently put it out there. It's a battle. It is not an easy situation to deal with, you know, growing up. And it's not something that I think goes away, but it can be managed.
Yeah, that actually was my last question. It's like, how do we as adults, right, like I'm all for talking about kids, but like I'm just in my own journey, right? So like as adults, how do we, like, I'm finding strategies, but I notice that I'm hurting myself a lot by forcing a specific type of coping to like help myself get past mutism, or like I end up dissociating. Like this is,
that's what I'm saying. Why you're winding yourself much more deeper into a dissociation situation. So what can an adult do? And I notice that we're having lots of comments too, so I'm going to totally shut up in a second. But as adults, you do have to find your strategies, and you do have to find ways to help yourself in not in taking a break. Okay, just it's what if it's all getting too much and you feel that demand. What's so wrong about just taking a break and having me time? And that's kind of what I told my eldest or my youngest. If you're getting in a situation like nobody's going to die if you take a break. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, I get really passionate about that.
It's great.
Adults, for me, you've got to take some time for self-care and use those breaks. If your body is saying to you, "Oh my God, this is becoming insane," leave, walk away, get out of it. That's what I say. Sorry, I'm shutting up now.
Love that. Thank you.
I really enjoyed that discussion, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bobbi.
No problem.
Sai has said, it's like all eyes and ears are on me, like they can see and hear my thoughts, every action I do, waiting for a mistake to happen. The fear of failure is horrendous.
Yeah.
And he also added, I wanted to try and do so many things that was just too scared, from events and food to schools, talking to people, even on the phone. It was, and in some cases is, just too scary. It was a big reason I avoided school and social events.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's that waiting and wanting, real quick. It's that waiting and wanting. You feel that from people. They're waiting for something to happen. They want something to happen. And that's a pressure in of itself, man. Sorry.
Yep.
And I think if we're looking for an overarching theme here that links all the little bits together, it's the same theme we find in a lot of autistic people's lives, which is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
As a minority group, we experience a lot of trauma, and that trauma isn't necessarily the traditional just got back from war trauma, that a lot of people seem to assume trauma is. So many things can be traumatic for us, and I don't think it's a surprise that we develop things like exposure anxiety. And, I think also something else that leads me to think that trauma plays a role is how many of us have been misdiagnosed with things like BPD. I was misdiagnosed with BPD for years. Borderline personality disorder. I remember I was watching a documentary the other day, and they were like, it's psychiatrist's terminal diagnosis. And I was sat there going, they're traumatized autistic people. It's if we want to get to the root of exposure anxiety, if we want to get to the root of really most of the negative outcomes in autistic people's lives, you can sort of sum it up by saying that the world kind of needs to stop being a dick to autistic people.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, totally, absolutely. Praise up, hands up, absolutely, completely. Because that is what it is, And when mine was growing up, and I'm trying to explain to them, look, they have a demand avoidance. That means that you cannot hold them in the class. The child will get up and run out the classroom. Just why is it so hard to understand these slight little accommodations? Not so difficult to make. And yes, can the world stop being a dick, please? It would be really nice.
Really nice. And Anushka says, I think many people would be more accommodating to someone with exposure anxiety than hearing the word autistic. And I think that just adds into it, because the minute people hear the word autistic, I don't know, what I hear neurotypical people talk about autistic people, and I'm sat there thinking, like, are you okay? Like because that's not it at all. And like anxiety, it's it's kind of like it's the big brand of mental health awareness, isn't it? So I think Anushka's right there. If you say the words exposure anxiety, people hear anxiety and go, oh yes, we must make people aware of this, but they don't care to learn the experiences behind it, the things that feed into it, the more complicated part of it, which is being autistic, being mistreated by a world that really has no interest in accommodating you. And yeah, it's very much like, yeah, it's okay not to be okay. It's like, that's cool and everything, but
it's cool and all. But like maybe make it so we don't have to be, worse off in the first place. Like,
I don't want to be okay with not being okay. I've always thought that saying was a bit of a cop-out, to be honest.
Oh my God, seriously.
Like, maybe rather than teaching us to be okay with the fact that we're not okay, do something about the fact that we're not okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yes. We've got a few comments in our private chat. Rocky the Dove here. I think my exposure anxiety was compounded by the constant invalidation and judgments.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Excuse me. Yes. And then we've got Ben here saying situational mutism and exposure anxiety are linked. Yeah, like that makes sense.
I mean, I would say, I actually would say yes. And I thought about that a lot because that happened to a couple of kids that I worked with. And I know 1000% were dealing with exposure anxiety and they couldn't talk. It literally they shut just completely down. And that's that's a disassociation as well. And that's a survival instinct. So I think, situational mutism, it could possibly be linked. And it is definitely a survival instinct to me, personally.
100%. And I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have to dive into this because I'm almost certain I can find a link between exposure anxiety and addiction in autistic people. I wouldn't care to comment too much right now because I've never really thought as much about exposure anxiety as I have in the past week leading up to this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll say without a doubt, there's on-demand avoidance. So I know there's a link there. Yeah. There's a link there. So of course there's going to be a link between exposure anxiety and that. Of course there will be.
Yeah.
Absolutely there will be.
And
another disassociation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Rocky the Dove says it's okay not to be okay is validating that to be traumatized is okay and that it's normal.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's the words I was looking for.
Thank you.
That's exactly it.
That's spot on. We've got also Inger. I hope I'm saying that right. I sorry if I'm not. Dissociation seems to be necessary, but it can also just delay upcoming trauma, I think, because if it's not recognized, what negative, punitive labels can result. Interesting. Yeah, that's a good thought.
I mean, I always thought the disassociation is a fight or flight. It is a survival thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
I doubt that. So, yeah.
It's a coping mechanism for sure.
I always saw it as the freeze response. If you've got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, then dissociating is that freeze response where your brain just goes, stay still and leave the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know a lot of us know what that feels like and have experienced that and it's horrific. Sorry about that.
I've experienced a lot of dissociation, with the sorts of I don't want to say issues, but I'm going to say it, the sorts of issues that I've had. Dissociation's been a common thing for me. And it's all well and good, but you have to deal with the trauma at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anushka here saying, I recon many people who are PDAC and feel within people around them, and it makes us think others can do too, or others can too. so it can make exposure anxiety more prevalent to them. Whoa.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's angry. That's a really spot on observation.
Yeah. Especially because I think with PDAers, you tend to see that they have this special interest in people, don't you?
Yes.
Hi, me. Hello.
Yes.
And, you know, PDAers learn everything they can about a person, so it's almost like they can't read their mind. You know, and
Honestly,
I think it's not hard to make a leap from, you know, well, if I can look at you and read you like a book, surely
Then
everyone else can do that to me.
Yeah.
You know,
yes.
or, you know, I can't be the only person who can do this, you know. So I think that's a really good comment, because I think it really well demonstrates that link between PDA and exposure anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I keep saying, to me, the only thing that's different between specific PDA and exposure anxiety is that the exposure anxiety is all about the attention that's being placed or perceived to be placed. Like, that is the only sort of difference to me that I can see, which makes me think that it is a more extreme type of PDA. You know?
Mm-hmm.
That's again why I want more research on it. I so wish I had the brains to be an academic again. I did it like once, we're done. Like, I thought about doing my master's, and I'm just like, this is not going to happen. Not going to happen. But I would love somebody out there who's academic to just go, okay, let's have a look at this and do some more research. So I think you'll find that there are more autistic people out there that are dealing with this extreme type of PDA than is known, you know?
But these are the types of questions we need academics to be asking, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, we need them to be saying, okay, exposure anxiety is clearly an issue being reported by the autistic community. Let's look into it. You know? But how often do researchers actually look into the things that affect us? You know, it's
Nope.
No,
and necessarily autistic academics. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just saying, it feels like trying to get blood out of a stone getting these things researched.
Yeah, which is why I scream for more autistic academics. I'm like, please go into it and help us out.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. We just had a question about any of the tips that you gave us, if us as the panel or whatever. Thank you. Would any of Bobbi's EA tips help you or someone you know? Two things. So one of them, and I've noticed that I've done my whole life, is like talk through objects. I personify objects all the time. I sing. The other one that's really good is the rhythm thing, like the disappear rhythm. I sing to myself. I make tunes. I narrate. I've just always done that. I didn't realize that could be a thing related to this, but it clearly is. And then the other one so that's like the positives. And then I don't know if it's negative per se, but I would say the playing hard to get and keeping involvement to small doses. I wonder, just putting this out there, I wonder if that's part of why I've landed myself in really toxic relationships. You know, like getting the playing hard to get, like being interested in someone that's not really that interested in me.
Yeah, but that's I'm going to interject here, because I'm going to say to you that that's without a doubt because you're hyper empathetic as well.
Yeah. And
right?
I'm a fixer because of my attachment style of being raised a certain way, right? Like it all kind of mixes together.
So when anybody around you is slightly, you know, even if you're toxic and they're super interesting, yeah, part of your EA is going to be like, ooh.
Tingly.
You know what I mean? But it is like that. It's almost like that. So I would think. Go on.
Okay. Yeah.
No. Go on.
I was just like, but it makes sense now as an adult who is increasingly waking up to my own reality and actually being aware, to know that about myself now, like without a doubt, feels really good, because I can maneuver and navigate relationships with that in mind and protect myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we do this. That's why we're doing all of this, because the information, you have the information, you know better, you do better kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Exactly,
And knowing self is so vital. And it's, I think that's especially if you're demand avoidant of any kind, I think it's vital to understand yourself massively, to then navigate it. You know what I mean? Work through the things, because everybody has to, the demands are out there. You have to do the demands sometimes. You have to. So how do you do that? You know? And for mine, it was me definitely pretending I was stupid. That worked every single solitary time. Pretend I'm stupid or pretend I don't know how to do something. Worked as a charm for my child until they were probably about 15 years old. Yeah,
Wow.
like literally, you know. And then they finally went, yeah, okay, it's not working anymore. You know what I mean?
They got wise.
You know.
They got wise on you.
But you know, it also meant that every single solitary teacher in every single school and even college needed to understand: do not single this child out in any way in a crowd. Just don't. You know what I mean? If you want to talk to them or you want to get something from them, it's one-on-one at all times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's real.
Size made a couple of comments. Sorry, Rocky the Dove, our resident pigeon pal. He says, I love to people watch and try to read them and their behavior. Psychology is fascinating, especially the psychology of normies.
Yes.
And then he also adds things like filters, being a rock dove, are an accessibility aid, especially with exposure anxiety.
Yeah. My youngest uses avatars. So the entire time of lockdown, and they were working from home and for their media course, they were an avatar. And it was fine. You know, teacher had no problem with it whatsoever, and also understood that they weren't going to talk. But by the end of the year, because they got comfortable with the people that were there, they actually could be able to do that. But it took an entire year to be able to do that. So yeah, well, I'm a big believer in filters.
It makes sense though, doesn't it? Because if you feel like your thoughts are written all over your face, then just take your face out of the equation.
Yeah.
Yeah. That should help, right?
You know,
like literally tonight they were going to join
people
us.
Realize, you know, the filters, they're fun, but size right, they're an accessibility aid.
Yeah,
you know, if it can make it more accessible to the environment if you don't have to present yourself. I mean, even now I'm sat here and I'm thinking, you know, I keep touching my face, I keep scratching my lip, you know, and I'm like, what are people thinking of you know, the fact that I can't sit still and stop touching my face? You know, actually taking my face out of the equation, I'll probably concentrate a lot better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anytime I do, you know, webinars and things that are on, like I'm rarely, if it's a Zoom situation, I'm rarely seen. Because if it's something, if it's a topic that I'm really interested in, then I need to focus on that and not worry about myself. You know what I mean?
I have a question. Yeah. Do either of you in Zoom just take, like, you leave your video on, but you take your own view of your own face out? Have you done that before?
I didn't know you could do that.
You can do that. Yep.
No way. I did not know that.
It should be a feature. Like, I've seen people do it before, so I could be wrong, but I know it's happened. So it should still be there.
Okay, I need to work that out because I spend more time on Zoom going like, why am I pulling such a weird face? Not realizing that I'm pulling a weird face because I'm trying to work out what the weird face I'm pulling is. You know, so I'm like, that's a weird face.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
That's so funny.
Chloe adds that Cy makes an amazing odd pigeon, and I would agree. Yes, Cy, you're a very handsome rock dove.
Yes.
And Ben adds, filters I feel can often express emotions when my words can't, i.e. moving joyously, or even just using a filter of a poop emoji to use that I feel like poop. And then Rocky the Dove adds, if exposed like that in front of people by others, then I would sometimes act out and become the demon child or center of attention because I can control that.
Yes, and that's what my youngest would do that. It totally do that, or throw something out there that was so outrageous, or say something so outrageous that would shock everybody completely. Because then they had the room.
Can we just focus in on that control thing for a second? Because one thing I've come across is that, especially with children, when they seem to be controlling the situation or want to be in control, it's not because they want to be in control. It's not malicious. They just don't trust anyone else to be in control, because the other people in their lives who have had control have misused that control.
Yeah. Plus, it's an innate need for autonomy.
Yeah.
You know, we are born with this innate thing of, let me control myself. You know, and yeah, I see it definitely in kids, and I think especially sometimes in my work as a TA, when I was working specifically with autistic children, I saw it a lot in them. You know, it was, let me do this by myself. Like, I can do this alone. Like, just, you know, I don't necessarily trust you. You're sort of like, but then I would play stupid anyway. So it worked. You know what I mean? Like, they were in control.
And Jaesic, do you want to read this
Jenny?
comment from Jenny?
Sure. Jenny says, my son can't do Zoom, but he can cope with interacting with people on virtual reality or talking on his on his headset when gaming. The difference is he can't be seen.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, that's both of mine. It's even my eldest is that, you know, like they don't love, they despise Zoom. The idea of, my youngest was going to come on for a little bit here tonight, and exposure anxiety went, no. That's not going to work. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's so much easier sometimes to focus when you're not thinking about other people being an audience to your existence.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Do we think that, so we all understand autism to be a spectrum, right? So, and we can apply spectrums to pretty much everything in the world, I would say. So is it fair to say then to apply that here to?
Yeah.
Okay, because I would say I don't have all of the experiences, right, that you've described with your kids, and that other people have popped up, but I do know that it's more than just demand avoidance sometimes. Like it's more intense to me at times, and I never had a word for it, right? And now we're talking about this, so it makes sense. So I just wanted to explicitly put out there that it can be a spectrum of experience.
Absolutely. Just like with pathological demand avoidance. With demand avoidance is also, you know, somebody could be dealing with it in a very intense way. Somebody else could be dealing with it not so intense and managing it a little bit more. It's still there. It's the idea of whether or not you're managing it. And, you know, with you've already talked about all the strategies that you've used in the past to manage it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I would say you probably got more of a hand on EA, on exposure anxiety, than exposure anxiety has on you.
Cool.
It's those people that don't.
And it's only in this conversation that I've realized there's a flip side to that, not wanting to experience exposure anxiety and that avoidance that comes with it. In that, for example, for me, I definitely had a great deal of exposure anxiety as a child. So I went the other way with it. I put myself in the spotlight because then I could control what was done with that spotlight. And it led to all sorts of things. You know, I've got national awards in various forms of dancing. I am a musician.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was the topic that I was forgetting. Okay, what about us PDAers with EA who are the extroverted theater kid? Because this is my reality. You bring up music. I've been a performer my whole life.
Yeah.
It's like
you're controlling it. You're controlling it.
Okay, because that's what makes sense to me, is when I'm on stage, I literally have had people tell me that I'm a different person, even when I'm just doing my own music, not performing a role on stage in a play or whatever, but like my own music, I become this persona, and I do feel different. I do feel like sometimes there's a dissociation, or maybe sometimes I'm leaning into my true full sense of self, because that is where I feel most home is singing, using my voice.
Because music and your voice and all of that is your passion. I think it overrides EA in a way, and you've come to a position where you are managing it and you are controlling it. So when you're in that persona and in that zone doing your music, you're probably your most complete self. So it doesn't sort of come in because you're the one that's in control.
That makes so much
You
sense.
are, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's the same with being an actress. I was an actress for years. The man avoidant is hell. But when I was an actress, I became it, loved every second of it, couldn't tell you what happened during. Like, I went into a completely different place. You know what I mean?
So this bit of the conversation has just finally made the penny drop on the addiction stuff for me, which is so trigger warning. I'm going to talk about addiction now. As an autistic person experiencing addiction, I've talked about the fact that I had a need for control. Like, I needed to be able to control my environment, my feelings, and it's that same thing. You know, my exposure anxiety meant that merely existing was a huge demand, because I constantly felt like people were seeing inside the constant feelings of being an imposter in my own environment, of everything that I felt was wrong with me. I felt other people could see it. And through my addiction, I had found a way to switch off the feeling of existence. I could just take a pill or a line or whatever it was I was doing, and I could switch it off. And that, I think that's where the pennies dropped for me. It comes down to that feeling of control, which once again you can take back to the I should probably read out Sai's comments here. Better to say no to things than saying yes at the start of the event, than say yes, then panic about it for days or weeks. I didn't decide if I was on tonight until an hour ago. I'm in control then. And Sai's also added, I was a mean pool player. It was one of my passions, but then I was asked to play in a league. I crumbled in many games and had to drink to get through it. Also led to many addictions.
See, I was lucky. In the 80s, I was lucky, but I know for a fact the only way I went out to clubs and stuff, because all I want to do is dance. But you're going to a club, you're going with a lot of people, right? So I totally did drugs and drank to deal with that, to deal with the fact that I was going into an environment with other people, and it deadened the senses 100%. You know what I mean? And therefore I was in control. I was lucky. I'm lucky that I'm not addicted to anything except caffeine and tobacco, sadly. Or nicotine, I should say. I don't smoke, but nicotine.
This idea of us coming on here tonight and sort of, you know, Sai didn't decide he was coming on until an hour ago. Well, for me, I pretty much spent the whole day ignoring the fact that I had a live stream, to the point that I almost forgot I had a live stream. And so then I was so busy rushing to get everything ready and get on, and I was panicking, so I was having technical problems with the equipment. And that distracted me from my exposure anxiety enough that by the time it would have kicked in, we'd already got into the live stream and I'd got into the flow of doing this. And I sort of have to do that thing. I have to do this sort of thing every time I'm doing something like this. There is a whole ritual to it, but it just looks like utter chaos from the outside.
You're talking my life, seriously. Before I do anything, I want to cancel. That's my demand avoidance, right? So before anything, I'm like, I'm going to cancel. I need to cancel. I'm going to cancel. And then I distract myself by just completely ignoring it, or getting into, like, I'll watch a couple of series of something, you know what I mean? Or like on Netflix, get my mind completely off of it. And then by the time it's going to come back again, like you said, I'm preparing myself, and then we're live. So it's never caught up. The demand hasn't actually hit me, and I can do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Ritual as you. I do the same damn thing every time.
My life is in a state of organized chaos.
Yep, I understand that. Absolutely understand that.
Yeah.
So same thing for my youngest. They want to be able to do something like this. It's taking them some time. But finally, this year, they were able to actually turn on the camera for themselves. So I'm hopeful that eventually they'll get them to the place, because it's hard when you have exposure anxiety and you want to do something. You really want to do something. The exposure anxiety is telling you, nah, you can't. Yeah, that's a kind of a battle. I think that's the same thing with demand avoidance. Anybody who's demand avoidant, there's a battle that everybody does.
Yeah, and we have another comment on screen. Jaesic, do you want to read this, or shall I?
Sure. Yep. Jenny says, I hate Zoom and being on screen and turn off the camera if I can. It's not just seeing myself I hate, but that I know what I look like to other people too. I've always hated having my photo taken. I'm autistic and wondering if PDA. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Question 2. Is this not just, like, I hate hearing myself talk.
Yeah.
Is that also included in this? Okay.
Yeah, but most people, I think that's a general thing. I think even neurotypical people have that situation where they can't stand hearing themselves talk, and when it's played back, it's a cringe effect. But I think it's kind of heightened with us, and especially if you have exposure anxiety, it's extremely heightened. So, you know, give you a bit of demand avoidance when I say I want to stop all the time. And this whole situation about being on screen and looking at other people and thinking about how they're looking at you. So I have Ehlers-Danlos. Sadly, my teeth, because I drank so much Coca-Cola as a child, still kind of addicted to the stuff, are a mess, are an absolute mess, right? And there's a part of me every time, that's why I'm judging myself. And I'm judging myself more than anybody else could possibly judge themselves. You understand what I mean? So then I think, in answer to your question, yes, and I think it's kind of possibly a little bit higher because we have that demand avoidance. So I can't handle, I've never watched live back. No, not any of mine. No, that's never going to happen. Never.
That awareness of how you present to other people, though, like, okay, so obviously I co-host the Especially Interesting podcast. You know, shameless plug.
Excellent.
Bobbi's been on there. Very good episode. And obviously I co-host it with Tigger, and you know, we have a really good energy and everything, and people always say it's really good. And then I try to listen to them back, and I get about 30 seconds in and hear myself go, "Hi, welcome to that." I'm like, nope, switching it off.
Yes. Absolutely.
Chloe, here we go. So Sai says, any attention, including voice, it's why I only speak to people I'm comfortable with or feel in control. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, yeah. And Chloe says here, I watch lives back to pick up what I might miss, but how am I saying this?
But
the video on 2 times the speed, prefer me that way. Oh, that's so interesting.
I didn't even think about that. That's brilliant.
I love that.
Interestingly, there is a whole community of ADHDers on TikTok who put all of their content on like increased playback speed.
Nice.
So like they record something, and then when they upload it, the video will play at like double speed. And they said actually it helps them process it, having it moving quicker. So, you know, it is a thing with neurodivergent people, like watching things at double the speed.
I did that a lot in college when they had lectures online. I constantly was going faster.
There's nothing worse than sitting in a lecture and you've got one of those lecturers who's like, hello, today we're going to be talking about, and I'm like,
literally the worst.
I'm gone. Like, I'm not going to hear a word you've got to say, and it's not because I don't care about it. It's because my brain needs more stimulation than this. Like,
absolutely. See, I'm old, so I learned how to speed read. So I have to stop myself when I'm enjoying a book to not just go, you know what I mean? Like, because and I'm thinking to myself, you know, and people are saying to me, I'm in the middle of being diagnosed autistic. Like, it's the only way I can describe it. Sure. And it was thrown out to me that I'm inattentive ADHD as well. And the first thing that came to my head was how I speed read books. I'm like, oh,
yep,
we do.
I've been described as, I think one fellow advocate said that if your average autistic person is the ready salted autistic, then I'm the pickled onion monster munch of autistic people.
I love that. We have a comment. Anybody see it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Katie here. I've been the subject of endless commentary about my physical presentation, my face, my voice, my body's response to affection. Wow. Oh, hitting it home for me. My anxiety is about the inevitable feedback I'm conditioned to fear. Wow. Katie, thank you for sharing that. You just spoke into my life. Oof.
I can taste the monster munch, David. That's fabulous. Oh my goodness me. Anything else, guys? Any other questions?
Oh, Sai says, I'm dyslexic, so I don't read much, prefer audiobooks, but when I do read, I speed read in blocks or just scan for the info I'm looking for.
Yes. Victoria, can you see it?
Dissociation of means of overriding demand avoidance or freeze response can sometimes enable a person to flee. Oh, okay. If dissociation, or is dissociation a means of overriding demand avoidance or freeze response? Can sometimes Okay, I think I get what they're saying. So essentially, you're doing the dissociation to cope, which allows the freedom to move. Either mentally, physically.
I can understand that. I can understand that in terms of my youngest. So my youngest was, they would go through all these different strategies to get away, and immediately the dissociation, I think, is what David was saying, is that freeze. I think it's a survival instinct. I think you can't control it. There is no controlling that. And yeah, I do think that allows, that dissociation can allow somebody to just go, okay, I'm out of here, bye. And that was mine. So first at school, they would run. And I mean, they even got out of the school at 6 years old and was halfway down the road to my house. Then it became kicking and hitting and pushing people off. Yeah. When that didn't work, it was bad language. And when that didn't work, it was complete dissociation, shut down. I'm going to close my eyes. What are you going to do?
See, for me, dissociation is the fleeing. If I can't physically escape a situation, I will dissociate and my mind has fled the situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Sai says that he's fried egg chili sauce and chutney flavor. I do like all three of those things, so maybe that's why Sai and I get on so well.
There you go.
Then I probably either would be American food of some sort. Like, I'm thinking Doritos because I freaking love them.
Cool Ranch or the cheesy cheddar?
Cool Ranch. They're wonderful.
Yes.
But then again, I found the one place in London that does Philly cheesesteaks.
Then is mayo slathered potato.
Definitely a cheesesteak.
Okay, Jaesic, I think we've got a couple more comments coming in.
Yeah.
Do you want to read them?
Sure thing. Did we read the latest Rocky the Dove? I'm dyslexic. I'm sorry. Did we catch that?
Yeah, we read that one.
Okay. Yeah. So Katie here is saying, I want to be seen, but I am immobilized by the fear of a critical response to making myself vulnerable like that. I think a lot of this definitely plays into vulnerability and like how we perceive not just like being vulnerable, but perceiving other people perceiving are vulnerable, right? Like it's all perception.
And most of the people that I've dealt with EA, at one point there was definitely a thing of them not feeling that they were good enough. Like that feeds the EA. It just feeds it.
I'm curious. I'm very curious. Like, I know a lot of this is already like, okay, so we have the nurture versus nature. We all know it's both, right? Simultaneously working. So with EA though, I wonder if, depending on our childhood experiences, right? If it is exacerbated or like, right, like pushed farther and developed harder or more in depth. I don't know how to say that, but
no, I totally agree with you. And I would say Donna Williams, Polly Samuels is a complete that was her situation. That was it. Like, she's a perfect example, of that, of having massive trauma, mental health situation where they disassociated to the point of many alters, to survive, homeless at like 8 years old. I mean, it's just, and I think that's the reason why her specific exposure anxiety was so intense, like deeply intense, like I said, to the point of breathing, and trying to stop herself breathing and swallowing. She would do it so hard because it was angry that, her body was doing these things and didn't understand it. So that's a complete different intense level. And I do think that it was 100% exacerbated by trauma.
Okay.
We just really quickly come back to that fear of the criticism that's inevitable, because everything about us as autistic people gets criticized. Like the way we communicate, the way our faces don't show the emotion that people want them to show. Then you can throw in the fact that like a huge number of us are also queer in some way, like whether it's, in our gender identity, our sexuality, like, that gets criticized. And, then you can be autistic and a person of color, and that'll get criticized heavily because, well, we know what the world's like.
It's compounding.
It doesn't matter what we do as autistic people. We know that someone's going to criticize us for it. Like, so, yeah. Oh,
that's
and sorry.
I was just going to say, it's innate in us.
Yeah, and Sai says that his exposure anxiety is closely linked to his rejection-sensitive dysphoria and PDA.
That, thank you, Sai. That's another thing I forgot to bring up, is like, how are these linked? Because they feel significantly connected to me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that PDA and rejection sensitivity is, and I'm just learning about that. Like, I didn't realize that was a thing, like that I would, I wouldn't be invited to something and the intense emotion that I would go through over that. Like, I didn't realize that was the thing until quite recently. So I definitely think they're connected. So if exposure anxiety is a part of PDA, then 1000% rejection sensitivity is in there as well. It has to be. I think.
Rocky. I'm just a big bundle of abbreviations. I feel you.
Yeah. Right there with you.
Also, Anushka here, right? David, did you want to read it? Or
no, it's all right. You can read it.
Okay. I've always done the stop breathing thing. Never understood it. Yeah. It's where our bodies are making the demands that our brain doesn't want to.
Yeah, and there's an added thing as well with the stopping breathing thing that I think makes it more appealing, is that not only is it intentionally fighting a demand that we don't get a choice in, but there's like an interoceptive thing. So if you're not sure what you're feeling, like one thing you can control and know what you're feeling is, my brain wants oxygen, I need to take a breath. And all of a sudden, you know what you're feeling. And I've seen that come up a lot, actually, especially with, people who are incredibly alexithymic.
And it's also an issue with food as well. Like, so, the whole not wanting, like, stopping yourself from breathing, but there's also a massive demand in food, isn't there?
Yes.
Massive demand.
That's
so I know for a fact that I definitely developed eating disorders for control purposes. It was the only thing that I can control was my body. That was it.
But sure, if I can't control my anxiety, my paranoia, my voice hearing, one thing I can control is the feeling of hunger. And it overrides a lot of those things if I let it go far enough. And we should probably have added a trigger warning there, actually.
Yeah, apologies. Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry. Anyway, it's time to ask everyone's favorite question. Bobbi, what is your favorite stim?
Currently, right now, it's my ring.
Yes.
It's
anytime.
constant, and I like the way it feels. I like the sound. Yeah, it's the ring currently.
Jaesic, do you have a favorite?
I do. I miss my ring. I left it in Colorado and they still haven't mailed it to me. Anyway, I actually, so recently I've been wearing a worry stone necklace that I bought at the Ren Fair like forever ago. It's this little conglomerate stone. It's like oval shaped, about that big. It's pretty and it's very subtle where I can just wear it and play with it at any point, and I love that. So that's been my favorite one recently.
Very nice.
Excellent. The two I do the most is I either crack my joints, which is like the Marmite of stims, because people either love it or hate it.
Yeah.
Or the other one I do is I take my thumb like this and I tap my head like this and I go up and down my head, and I don't know why, it's just really soothing.
No,
It seems like it would be, because you're like, well, you know, like the tapping, like there is literal things that psychologists have people do where you tap.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that, I mean, maybe in different area,
yeah. And Sai, do you want to weigh in with a favorite stim? If it's should I go ahead and guess that it's eating
no, it says current stim is filters. Current stim is filters. I'm sure that's what Rocky the Dove just said.
Oh, hang on. It didn't. Oh, he's
and then
well, that ruins my joke now about eating birdseed in Trafalgar Square.
Oh my God! Yes.
Wow. Amazing.
Okay, so yeah, I think this is probably a good stopping point for us. Next week's session is on monotropism, and it will be Chloe with Kieran Rose, Tanya Adkin, and Fergus Murray. And there's a question mark next to me, so maybe I will be there. Probably. I do love talking about monotropism. Yeah. Good job, everyone.
Yay. Great job, Bobbi. Thank you for your presentation. That was
wonderful.
Thank you. We really pulled this off, considering we all have exposure anxiety. And I'm pretty sure that all four of us avoided thinking about the fact we were doing this to the point that we pretty much forgot we were doing this. The fact that we are here and had a successful live stream. Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
If I had medals to hand out, I would give us all a medal.
Yes. A+ job, everyone. A+.
You know, just
so
imagine. We've all got an imaginary sticker now saying, "I did a thing today."
Bravo! Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.